Do you ever look around at the brand new comics with all your favorite superheroes and you're just sick of it? Sick of these superheroes that are obsessed with pacifism? Sick of your heroes whining about a non-existent oppression? Well, there's a solution to your problem, and its name is Judge Dredd. Just before I get started, I want to thank the great channel Comics Matter for giving me a shout out randomly. I'm not a 20-something-year-old, I'm actually only 15. And just a quick disclaimer, this channel isn't satire or a bit. I'm just trying to speak the truth. I'm actually really serious about what I'm saying. So, I know what you're thinking. British people can't write great heroic comics. And I can definitely see where you're coming from. The comics industry would be a lot better without the Alan Moores of the world. But saying that, not all British comics suck. Sometimes they can actually be better than the American comics. In 1976, a guy named Pat Mills was planning to create a brand new British comic strip named 2000 AD, and that's where a man named John Wagner comes in. John Wagner wrote at Battle Comics for a while on these pulpy war stories, but in 1977, when 2000 AD launched, Pat Mills brought in John Wagner to give him what they didn't know at the time was an opportunity of a lifetime. John Wagner and the excellent Spanish artist Carlos Esquerra created a character that was the embodiment of justice. Imagine if the kick-ass tough guy cop like Dirty Harry didn't have to abide by any rules, prowling the cyberpunk canyons of Mega City 1 on his metallic machine of war, the Lawmaster. No feelings or weaknesses whatsoever. He was judge, jury, and executioner, hell-bent on upholding the law. He wouldn't be defeated, and he would never be broken. With his iconic death-dealing lawgiver, a snarl to rival Eastwood, and a name that would strike fear into criminals everywhere, John Wagner and Carlos Esquerra created Judge Dredd. So in the second prog of 2000 AD, Judge Dredd debuted. And from the first page, this is already legendary. Say what you want about Brits in comics, but Judge Dredd as a whole is an absolute masterpiece. Most people say that you shouldn't start with the first comic of a character because they can usually be rough around the edges and not all that great. But I think it's safe to say that that is not the case with Judge Dredd. Sure, it took a while to have a clear definition of what Dredd actually looked like, and he does change over the years, but these early comics are by no means bad. Judge Dredd instantly had an iconic kick-ass look, and if you actually look into it, Dredd's appearance means a lot more than you'd actually think. The massive golden eagle on Dredd's uniform resembles the Roman eagle, or the other eagle that I can't really say on YouTube, but we all know what it is, and it's meant to represent the fascism of the character. Then you have Dredd's helmet that was originally designed to be similar to an executioner's hood. So just by looking at his uniform, we can tell what he represents. He's a fascist, bloody fist of justice. And that leads us into one of the major talking points about Judge Dredd. So, is Judge Dredd a parody? Well, the answer is yes and no at the same time. 2000 AD had a very punk rock, anti-authority worldview. Do you really think Judge Dredd, the fascist, liberal-hating lawman, was meant to be taken seriously? No, not at all. John Wagner and later on Alan Grant wrote Judge Dredd as a satire, but that's where things get a little confusing. So Judge Dredd was a satirical parody, but then at the same time one of the most badass comics ever written. Because when you really think about it, who actually wants to sit there and just read a parody? You need something badass to bring readers in. So Dredd, for many years, wasn't the villain like people try to say now. It's easy to go back on your word and say that Dredd was always the villain, but when Dredd is dropping one-liners and blowing up criminals at point blank range, I don't think it was fully satirical. I think you were also just making a character that was meant to kick ass. And this is where I might lose some of you, because personally I believe that Judge Dredd is a hero in almost every story, and this is nowhere more evident than in the classic epic The Apocalypse War. There's too many great Dredd stories to count. Judge Death Lives, The Cursed Earth, Cry of the Werewolf, Necropolis. But the story Blockmania and then The Apocalypse War is one of the most epic yet dark storylines ever told in a comic. You see, Judge Dredd has gone for many different genres over the years. Sci-fi, horror, comedy, sometimes he's even done western style stories. But The Apocalypse War is probably the most grim depiction of war I've ever seen in a comic book. And this is a tone and darkness that would be copied years later by Warhammer 40k. Yeah, you heard me, 40k fans. Shove it up your ass. Judge Dredd wants his entire character back. Anyways, this This story arc begins with the story Block Mania. Block Mania is an excellent Dredd mystery where Mega City 1 is hit with a wave of lawlessness. As Dredd conducts his investigation, he finds out that a Soviet agent has been polluting the water and the weather control machines to make the people of America turn on each other. That right there just gives you a little taste of how ahead of its time Judge Dredd really was. With the awesome art of Brian Boland and Dredd the most determined he's ever been, this story concludes with one of my favorite moments in comics. Dredd tracks and finds this commie scumbag in the middle of a thunderstorm. In the story of Block Mania, we've seen judges that have been well established for years die because of this one agent, so Dredd does not leave the perp get away, and when he finally catches up to him, he beats the ever-living crap out of him. And this story leaves you with many questions to be asked. Why would somebody want to infiltrate Mega City 1 and weaken it? It's because that was only the beginning. The East Meg 1 judges, which are basically the Russian equivalent to Mega City 1, are actually communist warlords, and that's when they send a nuclear attack to Mega City 1 and begin the Apocalypse War. What ensues is a 25-part epic, one of the most large-scale battles I've ever seen. On top of Wagner's great writing, we also have Dredd co-creator Carlos Esquera returning to do some of the best work in his entire career. This storyline has some of my favorite dialogue I've ever read, and this arc just proves what I'm saying about Judge Dredd being a parody. Yes, Dredd is a satire and he isn't supposed to be the hero, yet in this story Dredd is undoubtedly a hero. An army of brutal communists trekking through mud, rain, and the blood of American judges, and Judge Dredd is the only one who can put a stop to this evil. If that's not heroic, I don't know what is. All in this one arc. Dredd dies, then spectacularly comes back from the dead, then leads a guerrilla force of judges behind enemy lines to get the ultimate vengeance. Dredd, Anderson, Hershey, and a few other judges viciously take back this war, stealthily moving through the forces of commie scum and disposing of them rightfully. And when Dredd finally comes face to face with the leader of the Russian forces, we are met with the most badass moment in comic book history. Dredd confronts the commander and stands over a button that with one push could easily launch a deadly nuclear strike that would destroy 500 million Russians. The commander pleads with Dredd, "You can't do this." Dredd looks back at him and says, "Can't I? Half my city is burnt to ash by East Meg missiles, and you are begging me for mercy?" Request denied. Without any hesitation, Dredd eliminates Russia off of the map. Holy hell. What an absolute masterpiece. People look at this story with Dredd as the villain, and they see that end moment as a scary display of how far Judge Dredd will really go. But for me, it cemented Judge Dredd as a heroic symbol of justice and law. He fought for the American people and demolished every single commie dirtbag that got in his way. Judge Dredd is a mix of 80s movie styled action and the high concept sci-fi of something like Heavy Metal magazine. I think it's safe to say that Judge Dredd is one of the best characters in comics. Parody, satire, it doesn't matter. Judge Dredd is a drocking classic, and grud help any limp-wristed liberal who says otherwise. So if you agreed, let me know. And if you and your boyfriend disagreed with me, your crime is being retarded and the sentence is